Yeah, I will answer this. There's somebody here who actually asks, what is your view on singleness, on being single? Or that's my sort of paraphrase of their question. Yeah, look, let me answer this in what I think is the correct way. Two things. Singleness should be rare and it should not be wasted. Okay? I think that's fair to say. What's the background to that? The background to that is that there's no doubt that man and woman are made for each other. Or that's the ideal. There's no doubt, you read Genesis and man and woman are made at different times, different materials for different stated purposes, and there's a complementarity of description about the two of them, and the goal is what? Oneness. The two shall become one, it says. And in that oneness, they're given a job to do, to have dominion over the earth, be fruitful and multiply and image God. So that's in Genesis, right? So man and woman are meant for each other. To be one in marriage is ideal for that unit. Now there's exceptions. You go to Matthew 19, Jesus talks about this. And people say, oh, marriage sounds very hard. People shouldn't, surely no one can bear it. And Jesus says, well, marriage is good for those to whom it's been given. And there's three categories of people he outlines to whom it's not necessarily given. And he says, it might be that you've been a eunuch from birth. In other words, it may well be that for some reason of biology or whatever, maybe there's some genetic issue, or maybe there's something that makes marriage unsuitable for you. Maybe there's intersex people and that kind of thing, although a lot of that can be solved these days. So, that's not such a big category. There's also people who've been made eunuchs by men. In those days, you had that. In these days, I guess you've got people who've undergone transgender surgery and tried to transition back, and you've got issues there. But again, in God's grace, I know a couple of people that have been married regardless because the right person has been made available by God in God's grace and God's providential plan. So, that might be that person, but there's another person which I want to focus on, which is that he says there are those that have become eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. I think that's interesting. So what he's saying is that there is a category of people who have a job to do for God, which is of such a nature that it means they will not be married. I think the Apostle Paul puts his hand up and says, that's me. He has such a calling on his life that it would be incompatible with being married. That is unusual. That's a minority, because for most people, in whatever it is that they're doing, marriage is an advantage, not a disadvantage. And that goes back to the original design of things, that man is made for woman, and that's the way it is in most cases. That's the ideal in most cases. But nonetheless, there is this kind of person, Paul being one. Now, who are those people? Look, I think only God knows. And I think that God ordains it as such in people's lives. And some people become very aware of that, others just live with it. And they get on and do things for God that mean that marriage would have been unsuitable. A rare category, an unusual thing. Now, what does that mean then in this messy world in which we live for all the people that are watching who are single and they didn't mean to become single or have circumstances in their life that are just not straightforward, and through various complexities they've arrived where they are? I think there's a lesson in this, and I think that the lesson is this: if you are single, don't waste it. Don't waste it. It should be rare, but if it is you, don't waste it. Make your singleness a singleness for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus would say. Get busy, redeem the time, as Paul says. There is much that a single person can do with themselves, with time and resources and energy. And I would encourage you to throw yourself headlong into it and do much good. So, there's the encouragement that's at the end. Because let me say this. Singleness is on the rise, I think, in the West amongst younger generations, and it's not on the rise for good reasons. I don't think it's right for us to try and say, oh, well, there's lots more single people and we're going to try and find ways to justify that. No, I don't think so. I think we should call that out and say it's not a good move. There's a few reasons for it. One, for example, that comes to mind is there's a conflict narrative with identity politics and all that kind of thing, and equality and inequality and that kind of talk. You now have men and women in competition with each other, in conflict with each other, in a struggle with each other, which is a real shame, because that's not how it's meant to be. and a proper understanding of man and woman as God reveals it shows that, you know, it's not that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way, and we can overcome that. But that is real in younger generations because of identity politics. And another reason is just the whole turning in on self. You know, I want to be my best self. I want to live out my true identity. I want to, you know, grow in self-esteem and my self-love, and I want to have lots of me time. And you know, I am a person. I want to find out who I really am. Well, that's kind of cuts somebody off from the possibility of submitting to somebody else, doesn't it? It makes them very self-interested and not very good at becoming part of a unit and living for somebody else. And so I think that's a rise in singleness, this whole individualistic self-worship stuff, which is really dangerous on a range of fronts, but this is just one. These are bad reasons, and there's others as well. So we shouldn't lose sight of that clarity, that there is, you know, I think desiring marriage is good and right, and that's what people should do. There are those categories that Jesus sketches out. And the one that has the strongest, I think, lesson for us is that, well, maybe you know you're single for the kingdom of heaven, or that's going to happen to you, or maybe you've got there by means that you didn't expect. But there you go. There's the opportunity that presents itself to you, and you know, don't waste it. It could turn out to be something very good in God's plan and timing. And you know, commit that to God in prayer and see how it all works out. So that's my answer on that one. Hey guys, make sure you click like to like the video, or hit the subscribe button down here and click on the bell so you don't miss any notifications. And to watch more videos, just click here. Cheers. Go on, click one. You know you want to.